I'm disappearing. I'm reappearing.
You are still there.
Oh, good, because I'm the host. So I'm gonna go camera off, and if somebody raises their hand, I will go camera on, and that can be your visual cue that that I've got someone to prompt you for. Or don't pay attention to that, and that's okay too.
You act as if I have the power to know what I pay attention to.
Right, exactly.
Still getting a little used to the whole Zoom reality here, so.
Well, I'm putting that in your brain, and perhaps your brain will act on it. Good morning, party people.
Party people.
Morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
A comment I was going to make based on a couple of presentations I did yesterday too is the one thing I find myself missing instructing in Zoom is just, like interruptions and questions and things. And so while I think the rest of the instructors, would prefer a more formal hand raising process, and I'm certainly not going to override Chris's great help and not, encourage the hand raising. If you, have your microphone on and you want to, shout an interruption, don't feel like that's going to be disruptive in my session. I kind of enjoy, a little bit more, noise and reaction in the background. So I'm not requiring it, but if you, want to shout out a comment, I'm certainly fine with it. I've got a quick question for the group just to help me understand, what the most useful subjects of this session will be. Do me a favor, if you all know how to raise your hand, if you are kind of new to the whole subject of orientations and object transitions and things like that, would you raise your hand? In other words, if you don't feel like you've got the basic orientations down, raise your hand. Or shout it out or whatever. Does everybody pretty much in this group feel like they got the basics of orientation?
I raised my hand. I think I do. Maybe I'm just not thinking, like maybe once you do it, like I'll be like, oh yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. I'm just a little unclear on what you're referring to.
Okay, I'll do a quick review then. I just didn't want to, I notice a lot of familiar names on the attendee list, and I didn't want to like go through the sort of rudimentary, here's what all these orientations are, because most of you would be whispering in the background. You would know exactly what I'm going to say next and would be getting ahead of me.
Sure.
But if there's even one person in the group who would like a review of this, then you know me, I'm going to go through some of this in review. So
wouldn't hurt.
God, I do have some, I'm sorry, I know I'm interrupting. I do have some questions. Like I know how to do it, but mine still become jerky. Like it's not like smooth like it is when I'm trying to do it by myself. It like still does stuff that makes me feel dizzy.
Oh, you're talking about like in your orientation animations?
Yeah.
Okay, now the good news is, and I'll review what I said yesterday, just so, in case I rushed past it yesterday, but here's what we're gonna do in the future. If you're going from one place in space to another, and I should say really more specifically, if you're flying from one planet in space to another, that's going to be handled through this new thing that we call navigation rather than a go there, right? The problem with the go there, you guys are all seeing my screen.
Mm-hmm.
If I just randomly right click on the Earth here and say go there, every single thing that Starry Night does here is chosen Chicago. Every single thing that Starry Night does is up to well, does it say Chicago?
That's the new name of the Earth, Scott.
I guess so. Why don't I control Y that? So, a whole bunch of things had to happen there. Like Mars had to get out of the way, and then we wanted Earth's pole to be, North Pole to be facing up. So, maybe we reoriented to, Earth's, rotational axis, and, Earth had to get centered. Starry Night makes all those decisions for you. When we get into the world of navigation, you're going to make those decisions. You'll have the ability, when you say navigate to Mars, if whatever star there is right in the middle of the screen, when you get to Mars, your view of space won't change at all. It's just going to be locked to that space in the background. And at some point during the flight, you'll be able to say, I want to turn and look at Mars now. Or even after the flight, you'll be able to say, I want to turn, or before the flight. So I think, Jamie, most of your jerkiness and things will just go away with navigation. So my point with all of this is, for what we think of as orientation animations in going from planet to planet to planet, that will be navigation. And then the only way we're really going to use OAs is really just, let's say we want to turn the Earth and fly toward it and drop it. Just things that we do to an individual body now will be orientation animations. Otherwise, you'll use that navigate. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I have a question too, and this is crazy that this is Mary, by the way. I feel like I'm remembering you talking about this last year, and now I can't remember. Did we ever get navigate to in our systems?
No,
Okay.
that's still in development, and it's a big one for Clint. The whole go-to code was really started in Starry Night probably back in the 1990s. And Clint is having to tear that code down and completely rewrite a whole bunch of stuff from scratch. So I appreciate the patience, everyone. It's been a long process, but we're within a couple of months of really releasing something that makes navigation functional. So.
Okay, so it is currently on our preview suites, that option, but does it not do anything really?
There are two things that you could do with navigate. The first is if, let me get out of this mode here. If you right click on an object now, say Mars, you will see the option to go there and the option to navigate to. The difference between the two is that with navigate to, it's going to ignore a lot of the repositioning that Go There tries to do. Most importantly, if you're looking at the Earth with, say, its North Pole facing the left of your screen, it's not really going to try to reorient it quite as much. So you'll lose quite a bit of this nastiness, all this rotational stuff. So I'm going to do a navigate to Mars, and I think you'll find, and Jamie, I think you'll like this too. If we say navigate to, notice that there was no rotation of the sky at all. And then all we do is center Mars and then fly up to it. So it's at whatever axis it's going to be, right? The one thing that Starry Night won't try to do is rotate the sky in any way to reposition things. So I think you'll notice if I tilt Mars this way and we fly back to Earth, when we get to Earth, its orientation will be kind of goofy. Let's do navigate to Earth. There we go. So this is only a live effect right now. You can't access this through ATM4, but a second approach to this, and what we can do for anybody who wants them, is we can send you these favorites files. And this is one of the more advanced things that I want to cover. We are now able to go from object to object in space via a favorite file. And I'll show you what these favorites files are here. I've got a trip to Venus here. And I'm going to, by the way, do you guys know how to do this, how to see the actual background of the file? If I go to trip to Mercury and I right click on it and say reveal file, that brings up a Windows Explorer window that allows us to see where the actual files are. And then if I say trip to Venus, trip to Mercury, whatever, and I can either right click and open with, or I can double click it once I've selected. You always want to open these guys in WordPad. That's the key thing to remember here is if you're going to open one of these files, open it in WordPad because it will save as an SNF file later when you save it. If you open it in Notepad, it'll save it as a text file and Starry Night won't know what to do with it. If you save it in WordPad, it'll save as a .snf file and Starry Night will know what to do with it. So I'm going to open this ATM4 trip to Venus file. Did everybody see how I did that? Does anybody want to review? Okay, so I right-clicked on the file, reveal file, and then I opened it in WordPad.
Scott, I'm a little just, why would we want to do this? Can you go
These
back?
are trips. These favorites files, now that we have this navigate function, these are trips. These favorite files will fly you to places, and they'll use the navigate thing. And I'll show you the two things about these files that are really important. The first is a value, third from the bottom here, that says where we're going to fly to. You can ignore all these other values up here, but if I type in the word Pluto, it has to follow the convention of what Starry Night calls them. So Saturn is called Saturn with a capital S, Pluto is called Pluto with a capital P. That will fly you to that object, but the really important one is ignore planet coordinates. What ignore planet coordinates means is when you fly from one place to another, it isn't going to change your view in any kind of way whatsoever. It'll just, let's just pretend you start flying away from the Earth and the sun is way off in the distance. The sun is going to stay right there. All the stars are going to stay in place. And you're just going to back away from the body that you're leaving without any change in view whatsoever. So if you're trying to do a navigate type trip, you could set this value to true. And then what's going to happen is you're just going to fly to that body without any change in your view or gaze or anything. Okay.
Does that have to be a planet? Or can it be Sun, Proxima Centauri, what, like, can you fly to the moon?
Oh, it's any, I know that it works with all bodies in the solar system, all moons, planets, the sun, everything.
Okay.
I've not tried it with a star, but I think it would work with a star as well. There's no reason why it wouldn't.
Scott, I noticed that it gave a duration of 15 seconds. Is that a universal default? Is that something that...
Now that would be written into any particular favorite file. So if you're probably going to keep editing these favorite files. You'll open a Mercury one or you'll open a Sun one or whatever you had saved into that file is going to be the duration. And then keep in mind, all of this is intended to be ATM4 commands, right? So really 6 months from now, what we'll be doing is we're going to create a navigate to queue. We'll put in a duration. We'll put in a center queue. We'll put in a duration. I'm just showing this to you guys because you happen to have it in your preview suite right now. We won't have to necessarily do this. We're probably in the future going to be like right-clicking on Earth and saying, create favorite, tripper favorite or something like that. But just in case you guys want to play with this, I think this gives you a sense of what these navigate to files do. So anybody who wants them, we'll be happy to set up like a Dropbox link or something and you can have all of these. So just so you know what's going on with navigation again, I'm hovering over the Earth right now and I'm going to say navigate to Mars. And by that, I mean, I'm going to click on the navigate to Mars favorite and watch what that favorite does. We just back away from the Earth. We keep backing away. And then at some point we end up kind of near Mars. The whole sky stops and Mars is nearby. Now, if I do the favorite that's called center Mars, so that's it. That's how we'll be doing all of our trips in the future. And like I showed in the script yesterday, you could start backing away from the Earth and put the center Mars or center whatever planet right at the beginning. So the minute you start pulling away from the Earth, you begin turning, fly all the way, bless you. You could fly all the way.
I'm sorry.
Then when you get there, you turn, no problem. So does the distinction between navigate and an orientation animation make sense now?
Scott, I have a question. I'm a little confused because, and I think maybe some other people are too, I don't know, because what you're showing me, maybe this is a fundamental that I don't understand, but what you're showing me is like not how favorites usually behave, if I'm not mistaken. Like usually when you click on a favorite, it fades the current scene away and fades to the next scene.
Yeah.
Am I wrong?
And, you know, totally. Yeah. And maybe I debated even sharing this with
Yeah.
everybody. This is a hack that Clint put together for us purely for test purposes.
I love hacks. I just want to understand.
Good. Yeah, this
Yeah.
is a hack. Here's the way this is likely to work in the future.
Okay.
I kind of like the ideas, and I would love the input of this group. I kind of like the ideas of Starry Night giving us the capability to fly to places like we do in in Layered Earth, and to fly to places like we do in Zygote. The way TLE and Zygote work is if you go to a new place and you save a favorite, that favorite flies you to the new place. It's just baked into the favorite. I would like the ability to do that with Starry Night too. So let's say what most people do is use ATM4 to do trips. We have a queue called Navigate To, and we say navigate to Mars, and that queue flies us to Mars, right? And then we have another queue that says center. I'd like to be able to do this on the fly live as well in a show without having to write a script. So pretend you have an entire subdirectory of favorites. Maybe we even create a new window, and we've created for you a navigate to every single planet and object, maybe it's searchable, that you could think of. And all you have to do is click a favorite to fly to Pluto, or click a favorite. And they're going to be these beautiful, perfect flights that don't swing around all over the place. And then right under every one of them is just a center button, and you hit center and your gaze starts moving. Would that be desirable to everybody, to have, just the ability to fly around using favorites?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes,
me
but
first-
I wouldn't want to completely replace the option to fade from one scene to another, though.
That's what I was going to say. I like the idea of having the separate panel of navigation options.
Yeah, these do
Favorites.
nothing. These in no way have any impact on any future favorites. The whole syntax of this is new. Like when you create a normal favorite, like say make new favorite, now, these navigate syntax, that stuff that we're playing with, will never even get written into those favorites. They would have to be custom navigate favorites. And my thinking is they would either live, maybe your favorites pane is now broken up into regular favorites and flight favorites. So they would be sort of separate. And again, I'm not promising this as a feature. It's just that I happen to, once I started playing with this, I really love the idea that I've got a favorite that says go to Saturn. I click on it and boom, off I go to Saturn.
For me, that happens all the time. I mean, every time I do a live pre-show, somebody in the audience is like, can you show us, take your pick? And it would be much nicer to be able to fly there like this than to suddenly jump to it or have all the shifting.
Right. And guys, I don't even really know what I'm doing here. Like, I'm not even thinking about it. It's just, that was a perfect, aesthetically beautiful flight to Saturn. And all I did was kind of, while we were talking, click go to Saturn, and then click center it, and bang, you get a perfect thing. So if anybody, yeah.
Just to clarify, you can fly, so you could be anywhere in the solar system, universe, wherever. Click on go to or trip to Venus, and from wherever you are, it's going to do that beautiful backwards flying and then get to whatever planet you picked on.
Yeah, Jamie, decide where we want to go. Where are we going next? It's got to be on my list here.
Yeah, let's go to Mercury.
Okay, now this one, if I looked at the favorite, ignore planet coordinates must be set to false because it did swing around automatically, right?
Right.
So if I wanted to not have Starry Night spin like that, what would I do?
I don't remember. You got to open.
I'm going to reveal the file.
Set that thing to true. Set the flag to true on that last.
Yeah, I'm going to open trip to Mercury, and look at that. Ignore planet coordinates was set to false. So if I set it to true.
Not there, not there.
Whoa, sorry, Dave. Thank you. There we go. Okay. And then I save the file. So let's go to Venus or Mars or wherever. Oh, I broke.
Go back to Saturn so we can see the same
I might
trip.
have to do a refresh favorites here in order for that to work. There we go. Back to Saturn.
And then center.
And by the way, if you hit the space bar, you'll just automatically.
I was just, that's funny you asked, Christian, because I was just testing that. It looked like it did, yeah.
Okay, cool.
So trip to Mercury.
Okay.
And now you'll notice since we told it to ignore all the planet coordinates. Okay. And now we should be able to center Mercury.
Yeah, I don't know about everybody else, but that little list of files there would be really nice to have, Scott.
Okay.
It would be really nice to have, but there, could we get a couple more? Could we get all the planets? So
Well,
like
keep
when
in mind, now you're making work for me, so you're never going to get it if I have to do it. But if you had one of these files, all you'd have to do is open it and type in the place you want to go.
Yeah, we could just edit the file and put in a different planet or a different body name, as long as we
Right.
know what it's called
Yeah.
at Starry Night.
That said, I'll get somebody to make a whole ton of them for you. You know, we can have, you know, Robert or somebody make like, you know, 50 of them so you get all the moons and stuff. But it's so easy if you know the name of the body to just type it in and you're good to go.
So Scott, you're thinking ultimately to make Q files? So we could just type the name into a box rather than editing these files?
Yeah, you know, all of this, it's interesting we're having this discussion at Institute because all of this is really yet to be planned. If you think about it, there's all kinds of ways to do it. Let me share a couple of ways and then please weigh in and let me know what you think. But I was imagining, was there a question? Sorry.
Yeah.
No,
Sorry.
please.
I wanted to go back to a question that Kathy had actually asked a while ago when you first opened up the text file. So it was 15 seconds and it would take 15 seconds to take that trip. Now that is completely separate from whatever speed you have the pre-flight in the render box to take a trip.
Yes, I don't. Well, that's a really good question. The preliminary tests we've done with this in ATM4, we've been able to, in the favorite file itself, just say, I want to take 30 seconds or 90 seconds or whatever. And I think what we would do, rather than making you go in and edit that every time, is to, in ATM4, as soon as you drop that cue in, just like in orientation animations, you would be able to type it in. And this is why I kind of wanted to get into the methodology here. I was thinking that we would right click on an object and it would say navigate to, and then when we hit navigate to, it would spawn a little dialogue and we would just type in, before we save the favorite, amount of time and click ignore planet coordinates or not ignore planet coordinates, or maybe center automatically or don't center automatically. That way, after you've saved the favorite, you've saved the location, the duration, and whether it's going to center automatically for you. And that's how we would do it live, right?
And would you populate that with defaults?
Probably. I can't imagine you wouldn't, right, Kathy? Something like 15 seconds or something.
Yeah, just so you've got a starting point and then you can edit that, obviously.
Right. Or maybe you would have under options or something, you would have option for your default flight setting, right? Although I can imagine Clint coming back and saying, if you were flying to, you know, Proxima Centauri and it took 15 seconds or something, that would be kind of ridiculous or whatever, you know, maybe they got scaled to distance or something like that. But yeah, it'd be nice if you like 15 seconds every time, you didn't have to type that number in. So,
Yeah.
and then the other thing I imagine as well is if that box popped open, but you were just trying to do this live, you were just trying to do it as an effect. If you hit like the enter key or spacebar or something, it would do the flight without you even typing anything in, right? Because you still might want the ability to say, navigate to, and it just goes, right? If you need to do it live in a show.
Right.
But hopefully you'll have saved a ton of favorites that allow you to do just that.
Scott, would that go into preferences perhaps?
That might make sense, right? Right.
If you were doing this as a part of a live show and you said go to Mercury and you were at Earth, that would be completely different than if you were at the edge of the Milky Way and
Exactly.
go to Mercury, that 15 seconds is going to be a completely different experience starting depending on where you start. So how are you so setting your time is going to really be a little wonky if you're doing this in a live show, because you don't necessarily know where you're going to be coming from.
It seems like an accelerator might almost be a nice thing. Let's pretend you had a favorite where you were flying from Proxima Centauri to Mercury, and it was by default set to 15 seconds, but while navigation was happening, if you held the up and down arrow, it just automatically sped you up or slowed you down. That might be kind of cool. Something like that. Clint's going to kill us for like designing all this stuff without his input, but okay. But now that this is kind of where I was hoping we would be though, but now that we've talked this through, are we beginning to grasp the difference between navigation and orientation animations?
Yeah, it's great.
Isn't this cool? I've been dreaming of this for years, actually.
You're not alone.
Let's, unless anybody has a really specific question about navigation, I'd like to review orientation again, just so that we can talk about the basics of how orientation animations will work in the future. Any other questions on that? Yes,
yeah,
please.
Lauren had something.
Yeah.
Scott, I had a question about the center files that you have, like when
Yeah.
you center on a planet. Do they have the option to like orient them? So like, yes, you fly, but you're not like moving around like in space. But then when you finally center on it, do they have like, does that file have the option to do the true and false?
You're going to learn it with me.
I was just curious.
It looks like all we have is put the value in for how it's centered. And I think there's a duration in here somewhere. But if I recall properly, when Clint first built this up for us, the center value was broken. We would put in a second or we would put in 20 minutes, and it always took exactly the same amount of time to center. So I think that value is missing from the file right now.
Okay.
The way, forgive me for getting off in the weeds here, but we're dealing with one issue right now, and I'm surprised nobody has noticed it. I'm going to center something here. Do you guys notice anything goofy? Well, that's a little hard to see. I'm going to go to Saturn. I'm curious if anybody picks this up. One thing happens that shouldn't be happening when I center.
I just noticed the one time when you centered Saturn, the rings were perfect like that, but then another time they were like tilted. So it's
And that's, again, ignore planet coordinates, should put it wherever it is.
Yeah, that's what I was curious if the center had
The problem right now is if Mars is over here and we hit center, it slides right across the middle of the screen. What's that going to look like on the dome?
It's going to appear to rise up in the sky and
rise up from the east and like go to the center and then down again.
Well, that's what Mars does in real life, so that's perfectly fine.
Exactly. What we're getting Clint to do right now, the one step that he hasn't done with centering, is we want him to constrain it to our focus of interest. So if Mars is off screen behind us, we don't want it to fly through the zenith from the back and come down. We want it to look like we've turned our head and Mars is always sliding along in azimuth, not altitude. Clint hasn't fixed that. But I think to answer your question, Lauren, as it stands right now, it's just going to take the shortest path, but it's going to be tilted, whatever. The next question that would come up, of course, is what orientation are we in? Are we in ecliptic? Are we in local orientation? I don't know. I don't understand it. Like when we get there, we are located somewhere near Saturn, but as soon as I grab the sky, it's like I'm in ecliptic orientation. So we've got a little stuff to work out to get you into local orientation when you get there. So I think that's a good transition to the subject of orientations, I would say. So, just by way of review here, everybody, I'm just going to go through this really quickly. We cover this every year. It's probably very basic for most of you, but I want to make sure everybody understands it. I'm going to go back to the Earth. And just as a reminder for everyone, our default Earth look, the way that Earth looks when we're manipulating it in our preview screen, oops, is Earth will be dead center in front of us. It'll essentially be locked to the meridian. And we have the ability to move the Earth up and down. And we have the ability to rotate the Earth around our visual z-axis, right? We can rotate it this way. And we can also rotate the Earth around its center axis like this. But the one thing we don't have the ability to do is drag it off center. I can't drag it to the 9 o'clock position or the 3 o'clock position on my screen. It's locked to the meridian, correct? And we call this the local orientation, okay? Sorry that I keep sort of twisting the Earth in goofy ways. I'll go slower. There we go. Okay, so just to reiterate there, I can drag Earth up and down. I can rotate Earth around our visual z-axis, and I can spin Earth around its center axis, but I can't move it off the meridian. Local orientation, that is default. If I want to change that, if I want to have a different orientation, if I go into the options menu, slide my cursor up and find the options menu, locate orientation about 2/3 of the way down the list, and then click ecliptic. We're now in a different coordinate system. And the difference with this one is we have the ability to place the Earth anywhere on the dome that we like.
That's really nice.
And interestingly, what you'll see is if I use my location scroller, it no longer just scrolls us around the center point of the Earth. It scrolls us around the whole ecliptic coordinate system.
But as soon as you switch to ecliptic orientation, the position changes slightly.
Yeah, in other words, if you wanted to be in local and then quickly change and then do a pretty flight in ecliptic, you're going to see that.
Right.
And that's again why we'll start using navigation to do those flights rather than what Laura is talking about is flights from place to place in ecliptic orientation look way better. Do you guys remember that ugly flight from Mars to Earth that I showed you initially? A nice thing about the ecliptic orientation is if I fly to Mars now, it is a much prettier flight. There's a lot less, you know, changing and twisting and turning if we fly in ecliptic orientation. And what Laura is talking about, I think, Laura, tell me if I'm using words that are incorrect here, but it would be nice if we could have just said, put me in ecliptic orientation now, and it instantly happened and you didn't see it, and then off you go and take a flight, and then you say, put me back in local orientation.
Right, because there's times when I'd be combining an OA and then get somewhere and I'd want to change my orientation, and there was always that funny jerk.
Right.
As your location changed slightly.
Right. So navigation, the nice thing is you'll just use navigation for all of that. So just to complete this, because we have about 15 minutes to go here, I want to talk about how we're going to think of orientation animations in the future now that we're living in the new navigation world. So generally, what happens when we arrive at a body after a navigate to is we are back in its local orientation system. So to put myself back in local orientation, I'm going to go options, orientation, local, okay? And now I'm back in this mode where Mars is locked to the meridian, yes?
Just to make sure, did you say once you run a navigation file, you have to manually put it back in local?
No, it's going to be in an
orientation. It will automatically
orientation.
put you in local to the new location.
You're going to be in an orientation that behaves like local. Let me demonstrate that. I'm going to go to Venus, and I'll center Venus as we do it. So you'll notice if I use my location scroller, I am scrolling around Venus, but look at where we are. Look up in my display. We're technically not connected to Venus. We're connected to the sun. So Clint has done a little trickery to make it look like we're connected to Venus, but technically we're connected to the sun. So what Clint also needs to do to finish navigation is find a way to do exactly what you're asking for, Laura, which is to switch us back to local orientation without you seeing it. And that's the next thing Clint is going to work on. I think what will happen if I advance time flow really fast. Oh, no, it actually works. Cool. See how we're stationary with respect to Venus because we are connected to the sun. So there's a little work that needs to be done to get us back into local orientation when we get to that body. But for all intents and purposes, your orientation animations can work just like orientation animations. Let's say we've done a flight to Venus. And after that flight, we now want to do an orientation animation that gets us closer to it and spins it this way and maybe drops it lower on the dome. You will be able to do all those things with an orientation animation. Okay.
So Scott, I must have missed this earlier. You can run, unlike regular favorites, you can run two of those basically simultaneously.
Oh, absolutely. Sure. Again, I would, for the purposes of this discussion, not really even think of these things as favorites exactly. They're more like commands that take you places. They're some sort of odd collection of Starry Night commands on a list that we happen to save out as favorites files, but these are just little collections of Starry Night syntax that fly us to places. So these may not even, for the purposes of our future discussions, we may not even call these favorites. We may call these trip files or navigate files or something like that. But they are, they're completely different than favorites in almost every way. So for the purposes of process here, let's say we're now in the new navigation world where we're going to use this technique to fly to, say, Mars. And we use this technique to center Mars. When we've arrived there, and now we want to do something to change its appearance. We want to animate so that we get closer to it and animate so that it's lower on the dome and maybe spin it a little bit so that we're looking at, the Terminator across the middle of Mars. What are we going to do in ATM4 to create those little animations? Those are still going to be conventional OAs. But the only thing you need to do with an OA now is do those movements with respect to a local body. So do you guys, in the 10 minutes or so we have remaining, do you guys want to try that? You want to set up a little trip and then do an orientation animation after? Should we try that? Yeah.
You have your chat open?
I do, yeah.
Ian Clark has a good question. Can you answer that?
Sure, yeah. So I think if I understand right, Ian, you're asking what defines the ecliptic coordinate system, right? How do we think about it in terms of how that object is moving? Is that the question?
Well, sort of. I mean, I know what the ecliptic coordinate system is, astronomically speaking, but what is it practically on the dome in terms of
yeah. That's
the thing I don't get.
Sure. There's an interesting way to think about this, and I often demonstrate. In fact, I demonstrate it so often most years. I didn't do it this year because I figured people were getting kind of bored with it, but I'm going to put the ecliptic grid up. And let me turn, it's a little easier to see on my screen if I turn its labels off here. Okay, here we go. All right, So right now, Mars is pegged to the meridian, the celestial meridian, or actually our Altaz meridian, as we can think of it this way. But when I change options orientation to ecliptic, the way I've always described it, Ian, is, you know, you ever seen that that trick in the circus where they put the motorcycles inside the big spherical wire cage, and the motorcycles can drive in these loop-de-loops all over the inside of the cage? I think of Mars as
like
doing that.
45 years ago. Ah, uh-oh.
If the way Mars is moving around, do you notice that it sort of centers, the bigger loop-de-loop I make is further away from the zenith of the ecliptic system?
Or the ecliptic pole.
Right. See how I can make a little loop-de-loop around the ecliptic pole, or I can make a huge loop-de-loop around the ecliptic equator, right?
Yeah.
That's all it's doing, is we're saying every object that we're connected to now moves in a coordinate system that is centered around the poles of the ecliptic grid.
I get it now. You probably demonstrated this for me before. I don't know practically if that makes any difference to what I do with it on the dome, but I wanted to understand what the terminology meant.
Yeah,
So,
it gets all wonky. If the grid is up and you're only scrolling, it makes sense, but then it gets all wonky with the grid turned off, because if I move Mars like this, and then I grab it and move it like this, how do I know where I am with respect to the ecliptic grid, right? It's just, there's no way to know when the grid is off. But I find it helpful. I'll usually kind of do one of these, and that visually will sort of tell me, you get to the point where you can sort of see where the zenith of the grid is just by moving this thing around. It just becomes intuitive in some way. Okay. All right. So
thank you.
For the last couple minutes of the session here, I'm going to do a crude script that involves flying from place to place using navigation. And then we're going to do an orientation animation at the end, just so that by the end of the session, hopefully everybody understands how we're going to use navigation and then how we're going to use orientation animations. So in ATM4, let's go ahead and get rid of all of this. And we'll create a new scene, okay? So let's say our trip is going to start at, well, we'll start at Saturn. That's a good one to use. Hello. Of course, I have all the moons open, which makes it much harder to go to Saturn. Go there, space bar. Okay. So we're going to create a Saturn favorite here. So I'm going to go to favorites, add a favorite, call it Saturn. Let's say start, so that we know it's the beginning of our flight here. Okay, so I have a Saturn start down here. And in ATM4, in Starry Night, I'm going to begin my little program. Where did you end up in?
ATM4 Tripper.
ATM4 Tripper. I think you're in the root of that, are you not? You are. Thanks, Dave.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Why they pay me the big bucks.
So assuming you have made a favorite, you've already got this library of favorites, or whatever we're going to call these things, trip files, that takes you to, say, Mars, then all you'll need to do is load another scene. And we're going to choose the one that says trip to Mars. Okay. So if I just show my render box now, what we should see I'm going to move ATM4 out of here so you guys can see what I'm doing. I think what you'll see is it's going to strike that cue now. Oh, and there's an interesting issue. Did you guys notice that weird little fade thing? That's because it took a second to crossfade into the new favorite, right? And it had already started flying. So we always want to set our favorite transition to 0. So I'll show you what I mean here. By default, the crossfade between two favorites is always set to 1. So we're going to set it to 0 seconds. Okay, and then I'm going to run that again. And it should get rid of that little. There we go. We just start flying away. Okay.
We all just thought it was a lag in our computers.
What's that?
When we ran it the first time, we just thought it was a problem with the internet being slow.
Right. So by the time we get to, where were we flying to? Mars? By the time we get to there, we won't be looking at Mars. So somewhere here, we want to put a center favorite. So if I select scenes again, Tripper, there should be a ATM4 center Mars here.
I'm sorry, Scott, why wouldn't you be looking at Mars? Didn't you
Well, remember when we have planet coordinates set to true, ignore planet coordinates. Everywhere we fly in space with a navigation, it's never going to move the background sky at all. It's up to us to turn our view to look at Mars. We get to decide when that happens during the trip. So there's always going to be two components in the script to this. There will be a going to that body, but when you get to that body, if you don't do a center, you'll just be looking at the same point in space you were looking at before. And the purpose of that, Jamie, was to give us 100% control for ATM4 or for Starry Night to never, ever do weird movements on it. We want to decide when those movements happen and what they look like, right? So if I go back to my script now, you just play this whole thing for you guys one more time. So here's Saturn. We encounter the cue where we start flying away, and then you'll notice mid-trip, we'll encounter the cue where we begin to center Mars. See, now it's swinging into view, and we'll get to decide how quickly that happens.
I had a little fade there. Is that another the timing that you have to set?
I should have, good catch, Linda. I should have done what? Set that to 0, right?
Yeah.
Okay, now this is a great example because we've just arrived at the dark side of Mars. Okay, so we want to make an orientation animation now. And we make an orientation animation just by moving Mars around however we want, right? But if I try to move Mars around here in pre-flight, what's my problem?
You're at Saturn.
Right.
You're going to move Saturn.
How come I'm at Saturn?
Well, because this is where you left pre-flight, and the cues are just issuing commands, but pre-flight doesn't know about that, right?
ATM4, another way of saying that is ATM4.
Did I say Q? I mean ATM4,
is only speaking to the render box. It's not speaking to pre-flight. So what do I want to do to my preview screen here to get it to match up with my render box?
Match your.
You have to, you have to link, refresh it.
Refresh dome settings.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're looking at Mars, exactly the way it looks on pre-flight. And the whole point of this, everyone, is this is where we will now do orientation animations. We'll use navigate to fly from body to body. And now we're back in the orientation animation world. So if we want to rotate Mars so that we're looking a little bit more at an illuminated side, maybe we want to lower Mars and we want to fly a bit closer to it. That's the next step in our sequence. If I want to reproduce that using ATM4, what do I now do?
OA.
I create an orientation animation. Where do you live, orientation animation? Here you are. And let's just tell it to do those things kind of slowly. Okay, now in theory, what we should have is a really beautiful flight from Saturn to Mars, followed by kind of a slick spin Saturn and flight. I'll leave ATM4 up so you can see if this all works. Oh, sorry. Not sure why my screen got so far off center, but. So I probably should have placed that OA a little closer to the beginning of the script, but well, that didn't work at all. It did work in my original script, the original one that I built to show you guys yesterday. It did work, but is the point understood that we're going to, well, we got there eventually, but for some reason, I think it's part of it is that my screen got sort of out of position somehow. But does that make sense now? Navigate will become your whole process for flying from body to body in space. And in the new world, orientation animations will just be about, now that I'm at a body, I can spin it, I can move it up and down, I can slide it around my screen, I can get closer and further away from it. And I have always found that those OAs always work pretty nicely. They're pretty and they usually do what we want them to do. So I'm going to cover OAs a little more in the future in the Institute, but now they'll really just be about moving around a body rather than flying from body to body. Okay?
Nice.
All right, I hope that's useful and we'll keep you guys posted. Anybody who would like those favorites that we've already made for flying around space, just shoot me like an email, off list sometime in the future, and I'll make sure Brad or Robert or somebody gets you all those favorites. And then all you have to do is put the values in and the place you want to go, and you're off and rolling. All right.
Awesome.
Okay, thanks everybody. I think we've got a little break before we go to our noon session, so I'm going to end the meeting, and we'll see you in the next one.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.
Oh.
Thanks, Scott.
Or, oh, Scott, you still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, good. Phew, I thought I lost you. All right. So if we get these favorites, you said they're going to be in a Dropbox sometime soon?
We'll figure out whatever way to get them to you, but yes, we'll definitely provide them to you if you want them.
And then if I make stuff now, and then if I ever get back to the dome, would the Navigate still work in my dome?
That's a great question. I need to ask Clint. I think the last patch of Starry Night, if you look, you have Navigate to.
I do.
But I think you'll also find, in order for this favorite stuff to work and the center stuff to work, you will need
the patch.
I think this all happens in Preview Suite. I don't think it all happens just like this in the dome yet.
Okay, no worries.
If anybody wants to try it and your system doesn't catch fire and blood doesn't drip out of the walls, then you're pretty good.
I don't want that to happen. I will wait for the patch. Thank you.
See you guys.
Okay.
Wait, I had one more question. Oh, okay. Bye.
Okay. Dave is now the host. Dave knows everything.
Mary asked the question.
So the question was just what I typed in the chat. So he's using scene cues. Is there going to be a different kind of cue? Because this seems like kind of like a roundabout way to do something.
Well, because they're not really scenes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you have to.
It sounds like they're figuring that out, Mary. It sounds like they're probably going to make this a different type of, a different category, a special category, even though it seems to be saving them as favorites right now.
That's what I'm going to push for, some kind of a trip cue, so that because they're not really acting like favorites.
Or a nav cue.
Right. Yeah, nav or trip or
something.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Scene really needs to say fave.
Yeah, that too.
Don't get me started. They used to be called Go files.
Yeah.
Call them warp. Yeah.
Ooh, there you go.
We're gonna warp to this other place. Yeah.
There you go.
I think my session, is in a different room, but I'm not. I think.
All right. Bye.
All right.
Bye.
Worries?
At least I hope it is.
Yep. All right. See you later. We'll see you in a few.
Thanks, guys.